Welcome to the Better Than Bitter Divorce Podcast, where we flip the script on divorce and show you how to have a more amicable divorce resolution. I'm your host, Tanya Licklider, a divorce coach, a certified life coach, and the mastermind behind the Better Than Bitter 5-step game plan course, where I help individuals build a pathway towards a more amicable divorce resolution. Each week, I'll bring you uplifting stories from people who've successfully experienced amicable separations, proving that divorce doesn't have to be a battleground. Whether you're overwhelmed with grief, struggling with custody and co-parenting, or just dealing with a high conflict individual, this podcast is here to guide you towards reclaiming your life and being what I know is possible, better than bitter. Welcome to episode number 27 of the Better Than Bitter podcast. Today, I'm so excited to invite Michael Sallustio, who is a former attorney and entrepreneur. He actually practiced law for 5 years, but then he went out and pursued his passion for health and nutrition. He owned several other related businesses, but then he ended up going through his own divorce, and he had a massive custody battle. And he just took this as a sign that he was now supposed to go out there and pursue practice in more of a mediation type of environment versus an attorney. And he specializes in child access cases. So in addition to volunteering in the District Court of the ADR program, and ADR is Alternative Dispute Resolution, he is on several circuit court rosters throughout the state and runs a private practice both as a mediator and a parent coordinator. He specializes in high conflict custody matters, and there certainly are many of those. And Michael has also a lot of personal experience with specialized training and working with families of children with adverse childhood experiences, which are called ACEs, which are more of what we consider neurodivergent issues. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Tanya.
Michael, I always kind of take it back a little bit because I have everybody that's been on my podcast either has been in a divorce situation themselves or they're a child of divorce, whether an adult child that had experienced divorce, whether that was an amicable divorce or a contentious divorce. So if you don't mind kind of talking a little bit more about your divorce, because obviously that was the really big pull that brought you back into law from another entrepreneurial endeavor.
Certainly. It was somewhat unexpected, but we'd been married for roughly 13 years, and we had a daughter. At that time, she was 4 years old. And we decided we were getting separated and going to pursue divorce. And it went fairly amicably at first. And then the attorneys got involved and things kind of went sideways, as tends to happen. And listen, I'm a former attorney myself, so not all attorneys are bad, but some have their heart in the wrong place, and they're representing their client, which is the parent in these matters, versus the best interest of the child. And that's where things go sideways. So things turned a little ugly. And then we just, over the next 3 or 4 years, it was battling over custody, where our child was going to spend her time and how we were going to make decisions about our child. And my daughter is now 21 and off at college. And when I was in the middle of this, I never saw that happening. I thought this is just going to go, my daughter's going to have a horrible life, but I've managed to salvage it. And I'm actually still rebuilding that relationship with my daughter because it took some hits during that whole battle.
So what are some of those common reasons why people won't go 50-50? You know, what are some of the biggest issues about custody that, you know, the two parents involved aren't just like, yeah, we're just going to split our time?
The issues are so personal as to the other parent. I think that's the problem, is things get muddled. They get cloudy because the parents can't see straight when they're just focused on this other person did something to me in their mind. And so I've got to either do something to them or I've got to prevent them from getting what they want. Very often that's the case. So either one side's feeling that way and it's mucking things up, or both sides feel that way. And that's where the high conflict comes in.
Yeah, I always talk to my clients in my divorce coaching practice about the courts are not where you want to stick it to them, because the problem is the only person that actually suffers is you and your financial situation, because you're spending more money on legal fees, because you're really trying to get back at the person to make them feel the pain by which you're feeling. It comes about what people are trying to do to alleviate their own pain, and they're not thinking about what they're doing to their children in the process. Is that what you see?
Absolutely. It's quite frankly what inspired me to really get into this kind of work is that I saw the research and it's pretty solid by now. There's a lot of it on what happens to kids later on in life when they're in the middle of this kind of a mess. And that's where the ACE kids come into play. And that's what inspired me because the thing is, they're not only suffering in terms of higher suicide rates, higher unemployment, more failed relationships, physical ailments like heart disease and cancer. And that's
Wow.
where it just opened my eyes. And I'm like, wow, I've got to be a part of the solution to this problem rather than part of the problem. Yeah.
So let's take an example. So someone comes to you and it's a couple and they just said, you know what, we're going to try to mediate because we know that it'll save us money. And if we can even get 60% of the way through mediation, we'll do that. But as the couple enters the space, your mediated space, you realize that one of them had an affair. So, which is a very common quote unquote event that occurs that is a breaking down of the marriage. And especially one of the individuals is extremely hurt, is experiencing a lot of pain. They feel a lot of betrayal. So how do you get these two individuals when you know there's been an event, to see through the pain they might be experiencing and to refocus their energies on their children?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes we have to work through that offense, so to speak, before we can get anywhere, because at least one of them is not going to be open to discussing any kind of compromise and what's best for the kids when they still feel like they're the injured party. And violation, we'll just call it, was never acknowledged or owned up to. So sometimes the first session that I spend with them is getting through that. And if I can get the parent who had the affair to at least, if they even acknowledge that they did, sometimes they don't. But if I can get them to acknowledge it and get them to even to a place of apologizing for it, sometimes the walls just come down and we can move forward. But if that's in the way, we're not likely to make a whole lot of progress.
Yeah. And of course, that's why I got into doing what I do on the coaching side, because we hope to deliver people who have processed some of their emotional divorce before they step into the legal process. So, you have a more free and clear pathway to get them to the finish line. So they're not processing that pain while they're making decisions, because then their decisions become emotional decisions, like you said, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So what happens when, you can't seem to get through that? Like when the two individuals, so we're talking about custody here, we're talking about their children, and one of those individuals just can't seem to see the light, like to see what the importance is of this child having two loving parents in such a huge capacity, part of their lives. Like, how do you get through that? How do you get to an agreement?
Well, sometimes I'm going to have to separate them and talk to them individually. And if it's as you describe, if one party is feeling so hurt that they can't see straight to what's best for the kid, then I'll have a private conversation with them. In our world, it's what's called a caucus. So I'll put, a lot of this stuff's done on Zoom nowadays. So I'll put one parent in the waiting room and I'll talk to the other one privately. And that's confidential. That conversation is confidential. And after we're done with that conversation, they'll give me permission to share either certain aspects of that, what was revealed, or none at all. But what it does is it gives them the opportunity to share what they're going through and feel heard about it. And that really is what it comes down to. A lot of these parties who are stuck, it's because they don't feel like they've been heard, acknowledged. And so if I can do that for them, and that's what we call creating a safe space, then they can sometimes then see, okay, now I can focus on this other thing, which is what's best for our child.
And it must be hard as a mediator because, again, you're not taking a side, right? I know we went through mediation and, they can't really say to you, like, I think you should try for this custody. You can't use this opinionated. You have to be a neutral. So how do you go about being a neutral in that world?
Yeah, it's a learned practice for sure, because all of us have biases. I mean, judges are supposed to be neutral, but they all have biases. We all know that. So I've gotten better at separating that, reminding myself in the process, because sometimes this stuff touches things in me. Like, oh, this looks like what I went through, or I know what you're talking about because I, felt that before. And I've got to be careful not to do that unless I feel it can be useful and we're later on in the process and you just get them over the hump, then I can share a personal experience, but I got to be careful when I do that. But to get through all that, I'm going to have to make sure that they feel heard. And sometimes I'll say, "This is so you're saying this," and make sure that they agree with my characterization of it. And
Right.
then if they do, then oftentimes then they feel a little freer to be able to share what they want. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, do you ever give like a scenario by which, like, if you make this decision because you believe that your soon to be ex doesn't have the capacity to care for the child or
Right.
doesn't have the skills because they've never done it? I mean, how often do you hear that?
Yeah, very often.
Yeah. And, so what we do in coaching is that I was like, yeah, you know why they don't have the skills? It's because they haven't. And I always say to them, you would be very surprised on how quick people learn how to do things when they are given the opportunity to.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And sometimes that is a common scenario that you're describing where, they've got a hearing coming up and we're trying to avoid that hearing, right? That is one of the goals. We're trying to get them to work this out versus a judge deciding for them, in which case statistically they're back in court in 6 months to a year because they don't like that decision, right? So I explained to them, don't you want to be a part of this decision? Don't you want to be part of this plan? If you don't have confidence that the other parent can do their job in parenting your child and not harming your child, how do we know until we give them the chance, right? So let's say that the parent that they don't trust wants 50-50. Well, this parent that's holding their position doesn't trust that other parent is saying, well, there's no way we're going 50-50. I said, okay, so I'll make a suggestion. Can we try 5 for a period of time, a trial period, I'll call it. And if they prove themselves, then we can give them more time, right? In other words, why not put it to the test? Because your only alternative is handing it over to a third party who's not going to listen to your whole story the way I'm listening to it. We have, let's say, 2 to 4 hours to discuss these options, whereas you go before a judge, they may give you 15 or 20 minutes to tell your side of the story, and they didn't want to get down to business. I mediate in a dozen different counties in Maryland, but in my particular county, we've got 13 judges on the bench. And so that's great because I can tell my clients when I do what's called reality testing, I can say, okay, let's say you don't agree to this right now, and you go to court and you hand it over to a judge. There are 13 different judges. There might be 13 different ways this can go. Are you willing to take that chance? Because you don't know which way that judge is going to go. You think that you're going to be right, but I can't tell you how many people go into court thinking they're right, the judge is going to see it my way, and they're surprised. So are you willing to take that gamble, or do you really want to try to dig in here and see if we can work this out? And it's going to take some compromise. You're probably not going to get everything you want. But again, it's what's best for your child. And what's best for your child, quite frankly, is when you two are working together, because the conflict is what creates the trauma for the child. So you've got to figure out how to meet them. If it's not halfway, you've got to give in with something. So let's prioritize what those things you're not willing to give in on, what things you can probably live with, right?
Yeah, I do the same thing before they step into the room with you. We talk about what is that desired outcome? Like, what do you envision your life looking like, feeling like? And then let's go back to the details and let's get some priorities on paper. So when they do walk into mediation, they know very specifically where their priorities are and what they're willing to negotiate around. Most of the thoughts are just thoughts. They're stories that they're making up in their head about assumptions around the way someone else is going to react, behave, etc. And again, they don't know that for a fact. They just assume that it's going to be the same old, same old. Right. So we try to get them in a different mindset before they move into working with you, because again, if they have that mindset management skill, they can talk themselves and coach themselves as you're working with them to get to an agreement on specific, very sensitive matters. They can be like, okay, well, I prioritize X, Y, and Z. And those are the things that it looks like I've been able to have float to the top to go my way, but I have to be able to manage my mindset around the other things. And specifically, I do really know for a fact that the whole thing around capabilities and capacity and abilities to like raise children, if one person's been the primary caregiver and that's where their identity is, that's where they believe that's who they are. They don't believe that the other person can do it, and they might not do it the same. And that's the other thing, right? It's like, you're like, yeah, well, maybe they're not going to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches exactly like you are, but you know what? They get to have other things, and there's going to be other ways of kind of getting up in the morning and getting the kids to school. And, you try to create some level of consistency, but sometimes flexibility is good for kids.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's great for a child to see different ways of doing things. The fact is that you two share this child together. Both of you, in the court size, both of you have a say. Both of you have a right to be with that child and make decisions for that child. So the sooner you accept that, then we can start to get to work on moving what's best from this point forward versus staying stuck in what he did to me or what she did to me and how this person used to operate. And as far as you know, sometimes these people have been apart for 6 months to a year or longer, and they don't know how the other person lives their life. They don't know if they've changed. All they know is what they experienced with them. And so I try to convince them to give the other person a chance to prove you wrong, because that's what you have to be able to work together. That's what you want. You want them to prove you wrong. Don't you want your child to have two good parents versus the one that you see now, which is a horrible parent? Let's give it a chance and explore it.
Absolutely. And I also really encourage my clients to support one another in their new roles, meaning that I know with me and my ex, he always managed all the finances and, I always worked and made money, but I also did all the food shopping. I did 90% of the cooking, and we kind of had a divide and conquer for some kid activity registrations, but I did all the medical for the kids. And instead of just throwing him to the wolves and saying just go figure it out, he asked questions about the grocery store. He now has different places that he might go to food shop, but the kids might like food from certain places. And so I wasn't going to throw him to the wolves. And cooking, that was so overwhelming to him to have to put the 3 meals on the table every day. And I encouraged him, and I wanted him to be successful in making food that the kids liked. I didn't want them to be like, oh, mom's food's so much better. But there are so many people who want that. They want that feedback, I'm better. And I'm right? It's why? Why do you need to be better? Because it's about the kids.
Well, I'm sure it's one of the reasons you do what you do now, because you are sort of the exception to what I see as the rule in these cases, which is that, parents just want to prove each other wrong and prove to the child that they're the better parent. And it's not the way to go about it, because what I remind parents of is that a child instinctively knows that mom and dad are a part of her, right? So when mom makes a negative comment about dad, the child takes it personally. And that, again, is a source of trauma. You can't go there. I see parents do it all the time. And this is where I'll be firm in my mediation role. And I'll say, you just can't do that because that's not good for the kid. You're forgetting why we're here.
Yeah. You are my 5th guest, by the way, who has used that exact example. The 50-50, every child is 50% of mom and 50% of dad. And if you are a parent disparaging the other parent, the child consciously or subconsciously is saying, I'm 50% bad because I am part of that parent that the other one is talking badly about. And it's so amazing and so great in the divorce professional world. Everybody, every role, we are all on the same page with that. We're all pushing out the same message. And it's so important for children. And I just can't say enough about what you're doing, because I just want more people to recognize the fact that they've got to work on themselves in order for them to not have and create long-lasting trauma for their kids. Go fix whatever the pain is that you have around your divorce, but don't make it something that you're going to use your kids as a pawn in that process.
Yeah, you can't weaponize your kids. Honestly, I made mistakes in my custody battle, and I acknowledge that. There was a point when I realized that I was getting sucked into that drama, so to speak, where my daughter would come home to me and say, mom says this, you did this and you did that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do tit for tat here with you. This is the voice in my head when they're telling me this. And okay, be the better man. How are you going to respond to this? And it's really hard as a parent to do that because you want to defend yourself. But you can't defend yourself in that way, because then you're saying the message to your kid that dad says mom is lying. Whether the kid believes that or not, it's not a good thing. You don't want the kid to think one of your parents is a liar, and you don't want one parent saying bad things about the other parent. So there's no way that that's a good scenario. So I'll just say, well, um, listen, whatever concern you have, just tell me what it is, and you and I can talk about it. All I can do is be the best parent I can be in that situation. I can't try to change mom, and she can't try to change me because we are who we are. And quite honestly, a lot of times we'll get to the point in the mediation where I'll have that moment with the parents and I'll say, look, stop trying to tell the other parent how to parent and how to be. You've been trying that for years. It's not working. It's why you're here. All you can do is focus on your own behavior. Accept who the other parent is, good or bad, because you have to figure out how to respond to it. And that's really what it's about. It's controlling your own behavior in that situation.
Yeah, I always tell people it's like you cannot control what other people do, say, who they are, but you can control your own reactions to them. So that only thing that you have control over is your reactions. And your actions or reactions come from an emotion, right, that you're feeling at the time. But your feelings aren't coming from a circumstance. Your feelings are coming from your thoughts. And so, we teach this thought framework at Better Than Bitter that our life circumstances or the facts, the things that people say, like they are creating ruminating thoughts in our brain, right? And those thoughts are what create that emotion. And that emotion is that what creates the reaction, action, or behavior, right? And that action, reaction, and behavior creates an outcome. And if you want to have an outcome that you have deliberately created some clarity around, you have to behave and act in a certain way. Like if you want your kids to not suffer from long-lasting trauma, how do you need to be showing up? In order to show up that way, how do you need to feel? And to feel that way, what do you need to be thinking, right? It all comes back down to our thoughts. And that's the only thing that we really have control over is the way we think about things. And getting people really trained to do that work in a moment's notice in their life to be like, all right, do I know that's absolutely true? Is that a fact or is that?
It sounds like Byron Katie. Do you know who Byron
It
Katie
is,
is?
of course it is.
I use her work a lot and I use it for myself. I share it with my clients. So the work, the 4 questions, right? The first question is that true? And 9 times out of 10, when someone's caught up, they'll say, yeah, it's true. But when you ask the second question, can I absolutely know that it's true? I defy you in most cases to be able to say yes to that because you can't.
You can't.
And that's where you get tripped up. And that's where you realize that your thoughts are running amok and you've got to short circuit that.
Yep. I talk about, I call it the truth and your truth.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got 2 truths out there, the absolute truths and the truths that we've created in our own minds. Right. So it's great in mediation. I mean, I think we're all supporting each other in that way in the process. I think that one of the things that people don't really understand, and I have to say, almost everybody who comes to me is like, I need to find a lawyer. And I look at them, I'm like, why? I think we should start with mediation. And why do you believe that so many people just believe they have to lawyer up and that mediation is something that they don't believe they're going to be able to do?
It's typically one of 2 reasons or both. And the first is fear. They're going into this process that they don't know anything about, and they're terrified that they're going to screw up, they're going to miss something, and a lawyer is going to be able to protect them. And quite honestly, that is true in a lot of cases, right? Before you sign off on any agreement about a parenting plan, by all means, have a lawyer look it over. Make sure your ass is covered, so to speak. But the other reason is sometimes, and I hear this a lot, I want to get a bulldog attorney, they call it, to get my spouse or to get my ex. And that's the wrong reason to do it. Because to your point, that's not going to accomplish anything positive for your child. And even if you get that attorney that does that and is really good at that, and you win in court, what do you have to show for it? You've got a lot of trauma to show for it. You've got a lot of money that you're now in the hole with because that's thousands of dollars. You're starting at 10 grand in a custody battle, and it's probably going to be higher. I spent 30. And some of these cases are even higher than that, depending on who your lawyer is. So for what? Why are you doing this? Check yourself and ask yourself those questions and see if it's great if you want to get an attorney, but let's try this first. And then if it doesn't work, you've got that option.
Yeah, I say you always need to have a consulting attorney, throughout the mediation process as you get to the agreement and you're making headway and you're agreeing at portions of it. Yeah, you take the portions you've agreed on, you get a consulting attorney, make sure that, that's going to be good in court, work in your hearing. And, but you don't have to spend a lot of money on that. And I also believe that You have to hire the right attorney, because I know that I did not hire the right attorney to be my consulting attorney. I knew very specifically what I wanted, and that what we were wanting, because we were in mediation, we come to an agreement, and then they start tearing it apart. I'm like, no, that's not what I want you to do. I just want you to dot the I's and cross the T's and make sure that it's like legal, but don't start trying to convince me that I can like go get more and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Because that's in their benefit.
Absolutely. And so real quick, I just remembered something that I wanted to mention, the Byron Katie work. And one offshoot of that I use in my process when parents are stuck and they can't see the other person's point of view is what's lacking in this situation is empathy, right? And I think you have to get there somehow, if it's possible. Some people can't go there, but you've got to be able to see the other, put yourself in the other parent's shoes before we're going to make any real progress. So one of the questions I ask them individually, so that they don't feel guarded when they're answering this question with me, just so they can see themselves what's going on, is in what way is the other parent, do you feel self-conscious about their role as a parent? So it requires them to put themselves in the other parent's shoes in a state of vulnerability. And the second question, which is a great follow-up question to that, is in what way am I contributing to this conflict? And I will tell you 9 times out of 10, the answer to that second question is taking advantage of the weakness of the other parent that they named in the first question.
That's
really important.
Yeah. So interesting. And you when you live with people for a long time, you know their weaknesses, you know their vulnerabilities. And, once again, you go back to the sticking it to them. You're trying to poke them where it hurts, and that is not going to be what's good for the kids. And the other thing is, once you like quote unquote win in court, if you decide to go into like a litigation contentious, you still need to co-parent with this individual moving forward. And so that like massive amount of contentious conversations and communication, it rolls over into the co-parenting environment. And, the kids don't deserve that. I remember sitting at a table with a friend, and, her son was home. He was in high school. And I think there was like a changing of the guards night. The son was supposed to go to dad's, and dad did come pick him up. Like I said, he was in high school, but he didn't have his license. And, the banter was like, what does dad think he's doing? He's supposed to figure out the transportation. I'm not supposed to get up. You know what? Just get up and drive the child to the dad's. Why does the child need to hear all the things that the dad's not doing right? So, because if you want to have that conversation, it's okay. You pick up the phone later. Hey, I dropped so-and-so off, but I want to remind you next time that when we do change houses, we had made it a point that it was a responsibility of the other parent to make sure they have transportation. A little bit of the Biff method, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Biff method, right? My daughter, she's got some wisdom, and she always has. And when about 16 years old, when we were still sort of jostling back and forth, with fighting for time with her, what you don't want to do is use your kid as a messenger.
No.
And that's what was happening. We were both doing it. And my daughter, to her credit, just put up a boundary and said, I'm not doing that anymore. You guys work out your own shit. I'm not doing that anymore. So leave me out of it. Tell me when it's done, and we can go from there. I'm like, wow. I mean, your kids can teach you stuff.
Oh, they do. Said some. We were like on speakerphone with like my son and my ex and myself, and we were having a conversation. And I think I said something, and I thought it was very direct. And my son looks at me. He's like, "Mom, you're being very passive aggressive." And I'm like, I am. And like, I immediately had to rethink what I said. I was like, okay, because I just thought I was being direct. He's like, nope, that was very passive. And then I thanked him later because I rethought about it. And I really appreciate the fact that you brought that to my attention. And you're right. Thinking back through what came out of my mouth, I could see how that might be construed as being passive aggressive. And I appreciate it because I don't want to be that way. That's not how I want to communicate at all. And he smiled, like he just had a grin ear to ear. Like he just felt so good about himself and the fact that, I was open to the constructive criticism, and how to do things better. Because I only want the kids to hear positive communication, healthy communication. So when I stepped into mediation, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I had no idea what I was supposed to prepare. I just showed up. And I would say 99% of people just show up. So let's talk about day one. What is your expectation or what is your wish for how people arrive into mediation?
I make it clear what my role is from that first session, the beginning of it, and we'll go over the housekeeping, so to speak. And I'll say, look, I'm not here to decide who's right and wrong. I am a neutral party, and I am not a judge or a magistrate. So if you have any intentions of proving to me by showing me evidence, you've got copies of text messages and emails, I don't want to see them. Not my role. So what we're doing today is I just want to hear your story, why you're here. And if you want to go into a little history, that's fine, because sometimes it's helpful. But if we get bogged down in that, then I'll move us on from that. But let's just start off getting to know why we're here. But if there's kids involved, which is 90% of my cases, then we're going to focus some time in the beginning on, tell me about your kid, because I want that to be the focus from the get-go. So I want each of them to chime in on how their kid is doing, by their observations, what their kids' likes and dislikes are, what kind of kid are they? Are they more reserved? Are they outgoing? Are they doing well in school? Do they have any health issues? Get the focus on the kid. And sometimes that'll just bring a smile to their faces because they get to share about their kid, and that's the focus. And I'll even ask them for a picture of their kid. And if things are going off the rails halfway through the session, I'll pop a picture of the kid up on the screen and say, wait a minute, you're forgetting where your focus is supposed to be. It's right here. Act like your kid's in the room right now. Are you going to say that kind of thing now? And, it's just a check. It's a reality check.
So are you hoping that people have done some work on the financial asset side when they step into your office, that they show up? Maybe they have met with a CDFA. They have a really good understanding of what their potential asset divisions could potentially look like, have a couple of different scenarios. Do you like people to be that prepared when they walk in?
So when it comes to the property financial issues, it's always secondary if there's kids involved. We'll do that in later sessions. But in preparation for that, I have a very detailed asset liability budget questionnaire. It's 10 pages long, and they got to fill in the blanks. And they're listing all their assets. They're listing whose name's on what accounts, what debts they have, all that stuff. So yeah, it sort of cues them up to, if they don't know some of this information, they got to go find it before we meet.
Okay.
I want them to come to the table with all that.
First session, in summary, you walk in, you get to know the couple. What was the irreconcilable differences that, broke down the marriage, just so you get a better understanding what their roles are most likely in the marriage. Like, do they both work? Is there one person that stays home with the kids, et cetera? Getting a better understanding of their dynamic. The second thing is you get to know their child or children. You try to understand their behaviors, what their interests are. If, like you said, they're extrovert, introvert, maybe they're super athlete, maybe they are a homebody, maybe they're flexible, maybe they have OCD, who knows, right? So you get to know the child so you can really guide them into what they need to be thinking about. And then the third thing is this is what you need to gather, 10-page questionnaire that it's going to get really detailed around the assets and everything else, because it sounds to me that is almost more cut and dry than the children piece of it. Once you have all of the information and you're looking at it, then it's just kind of moving pieces on a chessboard.
Well, yeah, we have to know what we're working with on the property end of things, right? So the frequent common sticking points are going to be what's going to happen to the house. And what's going to happen regarding retirement accounts. Those are two big areas that's where they'll hold their ground, or that's where they feel like now my attorney has to be involved. That's fine. When we get to the property piece, I don't allow attorneys in custody mediations at all. Yeah. When we're talking about the kid and the schedule and decision-making around the kid, there's no attorneys in my sessions. Yeah. And every mediator is different, but most mediators agree with me on that. When it comes to the property stuff, I would love for the attorneys not to be there. But sometimes if they're in the fear mode and you've got one spouse who's not working, they're going to need some supportive income, and the house might be part of that, then they're going to have their attorneys there, and I'll invite both sides to have their attorneys if they have them at that point. But very often I talk them into doing it without the attorneys first.
So some of the things that I also see is that people want to have custody of their kids because they don't want to pay as much child support. And do you see that?
Unfortunately, that is the motivation sometimes. And you can usually see through that just based on, like, if a father has been sort of let's just call it a deadbeat father, or sometimes I see mothers in the same role where they haven't been contributing much to the parenting role, right? And now they're in mediation because someone filed for custody. And now they're saying, oh, now I want to be more involved. Oh, that's clearly why that is. Because now I'm going to be paying out some monthly child support because, at least in this state, in most states, I think it's kind of like this, where the child spends most of their time is the other parent's going to be paying more child support because they're helping support that child while the child's in the other parent's care. So, and they know that. Either their attorney's told them that or they've been told by a friend who's been through the same thing that that's a deal. And they're fighting for custody for that reason alone. They won't admit it, but sometimes what other reason is there looking at what they're saying, you know?
Yeah, I find that very difficult. And I also believe that I hear that on the other side in coaching. So the concern is that, yes, the father or the mother hasn't been involved. And the fear is that now they know they're going to need to pay for the non-involvement. And the other spouse gets fearful that that is the reason why they're asking for custody. And therefore they're living in fear around intent because of course they want to protect the well-being of their children. And again, I try to explain that, well, maybe you didn't give them a chance to parent. You know, let's go through that. Maybe the reason why they weren't as involved is because you didn't let them be involved. Let's talk through that. You know, was that a scenario? And like you had said earlier on, can you just give them a little bit of responsibility and time and see how they do? And then continue to do that. And you do that in transition. Like you do that before it gets to the agreement place when you're separated and you're in a transitional thing. You know, you do trial and error. You do some transition planning and you get people practicing what the reality could be in the agreement and you see where you end up on that.
Yeah, both parents are seemingly fit, right? There's no documented record of criminal behavior or gross neglect or abuse. Then, and the other parent is denying them any access to the child, and they've got a court hearing coming up in a few months. That's part of the reality testing. I'll say to the parent who's withholding, how are you going to explain to the judge you've been denying access to your child? What's going to be your reason for that? Because you don't have any of these things that would give a judge reason to deny access. Now, listen, some cases, there's just a bad parent. They do have a criminal record or they do have a history of protective orders or whatever. And in that, that's a different matter. And in some of those cases, I'll just say, look, if they won't agree because the bad parent is not agreeing to any terms, he's being unreasonable or she's being unreasonable, then in some cases, I'll just say, you know what, you're just going to have to go to court. You need a judge to tell you what you're doing is not going to work.
So I end with my 3 top tips of things that I got out of today's session, but I do want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience how they can find you. And then I'll wrap it up with my 3 top tips of things I pulled out of today.
Yeah. So I have a website called Arundel Mediation. It's where Arundel and Arundel County is where I am in Maryland, but I do mediate cases in other states. Because in most states that's just fine. ArundelMediation.com is my website, and you can find me there as well. No books at the moment. My email address, michael@arundelmediation.com.
All of your information in our show notes. So if people do want to connect with you, and mediation can happen across state lines. And I just want people to know that if you are looking for a legal agreement to be created, if you are working with a mediator who is not licensed in your state, they can put together a memorandum of understanding. And then you take that memorandum and you bring that to a lawyer and they can put the agreement together. But the mediation process can always happen over Zoom and over county lines or state lines. Lots of mediators, amazing mediators are working all over the country, working with people to get them to the right agreement and the right endings. Can't say enough about Michael's work and all the mediators who are working towards this alternative dispute resolution, because we're all out there trying to change the divorce dialogue to make it so individuals who are getting divorced, it doesn't have to be such a tumultuous experience, that it doesn't have to create long-lasting trauma for your children. You know, you can decide that this is the direction you want to go and you want to try to come to an agreement and save yourself money. So the 3 things I really pulled out of today is 1, this idea around a reality check. And I love Michael's work around that, doing reality checks before you step into that hearing, whether it's an uncontested hearing or a contested hearing. Hopefully you're not moving into a contested environment, but doing a reality check to figure out very specifically, like, what is the intent? Why are you having this argument? You know, what is the outcome that you're looking for? And being able to be really clear about that. The other thing, Michael, and I really agreed upon is that you cannot change other people. You can't change their behaviors. You can only manage your own reactions to them. And that is so important. And the third thing is really about the child. The child needs to be at the forefront of all negotiations. That's the first thing Michael does when you walk into the room. He wants to get to know your kids, because those kids, the way that they are in their daily lives, it really affects the way that custody is going to work for them. And you cannot disparage your other spouse, because the kids are not the messengers. The kids know that they are 50% mom and 50% dad. And if you begin to talk badly about that other spouse, then that child, consciously or unconsciously, is going to think that they're bad. So if you do have things that you need to be communicating, you communicate them as adults. And if a kid makes a comment, you say, thank you for the information. Mom and I don't have the conversation with your children. So again, all of Michael's information will be in the show notes. I'm so appreciative of your time today, Michael. And I hope that, we can work together and get more people being better than bitter.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the work you're doing. Appreciate it.
Are you feeling overwhelmed? Or maybe you're just feeling so alone right now. Divorce can be very lonely, especially if you feel that you're not being supported by your social circle or your family. And even if you do have people in your social circle that have been divorced, it is your choice to decide how you want a divorce. And at Better Than Bitter, we help you build a pathway towards a more amicable resolution in order to save you money on legal fees and to save you and your children from any long-lasting trauma. We are offering an amazing opportunity for you to jump into our support group membership plus. Why the plus? We not only meet once a week and have a community of people who are going through divorce just like you, but we give you access to our library of information and resources, anywhere from articles to workshops to webinars to mini courses. And we also have special offers that are being provided by divorce professionals who are giving you free consults, as well as guidebooks on real estate, mortgage, and more. So don't miss the opportunity to take advantage of this promotion. We are giving you 2 months for the price of one. That comes out to $18.40 a week for 8 weeks. That's right, just $18.40 a week for 8 weeks. Are you not worth it? So go ahead and click on the link in the show notes or head over to our website at betterthanbitter.coach. And there you will see access to our support group membership. That's 50% off of 2 months. So do not wait. We are limiting the amount of people that we can add to our support group. So jump on this opportunity and get the support that you need today. Thanks for tuning in to Better Than Bitter, Navigating an Amicable Divorce. Whether you are at the beginning of your divorce journey, midway through, or even done, we want the stories from our guests to give you hope that an amicable resolution is possible. If you'd like to dive deeper into today's episode, check out our show notes for a full transcript, reflections, and links to learn more about Better Than Bitter's coaching, courses, and how to connect with our fabulous guests. If you're ready for more support, you can head over to betterthanbitter.coach. There you'll find details and additional information on our 5-step game plan multimedia course, our one-to-one Zoom coaching, group coaching, monthly memberships, events and retreats, and a whole lot more. Plus, we've got a ton of free resources like our monthly newsletter, our private Facebook group, Instagram channel, and a library of articles and free webinars to help you along the way. When you go to our website, you'll be able to schedule a free 45-minute breakthrough call. Remember, we're here to help you reach an amicable resolution. Find your courage and believe in your brighter future, because you know what? It is possible. At Better Than Bitter, we measure success by what we give and not by what we get. So let's change the divorce dialogue together. It's time to be better than bitter.